Hello viewers, welcome back. At one point in time, I had this introduction all planned out, and then I watched the last few episodes. I'll say up front that this is one of those shows where the writers pull the rug out from underneath you in the second to last episode, and suddenly you're not completely sure about everything that's happened up to that point. Now, as to whether this twist was done successfully, well, let's just take this one step at a time. Oh, and beware for spoilers. Lots of spoilers. H2O starts with our main character, Takuma, moving to a small village to stay with his eccentric uncle. At first, it seemed like your pretty typical anime story. Boy moves to a new town where, go figure, the only other important characters are all girls. But there's a bit more to this story. It actually feels like a few different stories all thrown together, but like I said, we're trying to take this one step at a time. So, 3 of the girls are more important than the rest. First is Otoha, who comes right out and introduces herself as a spirit. We'll get back to her. Next is Hinata, the kind-hearted student rep whose family basically runs the village, and Hayami, who everyone else seems to hate for some mysterious reason. Their stories intertwine as Takuma gets closer to both of them, creating a pretty low-key love triangle. Low-key because the romance isn't really the point at first. Takuma learns a few very important things as he spends more time with them. First is that Hayami's family used to run everything, but they abused their power, forcing all the other villagers into crippling poverty. Eventually, Hinata's family led the charge to banish them from the village, leaving only Hayami behind. Up until this point, Hayami and Hinata were best friends. Once the Kagura family rose to power and Hayami was made an outcast, Hinata's grandfather forbid the friendship, and Hinata didn't have it in her to disobey him. And so, in a very small-town way, their past friendship has become something that everyone remembers, but no one talks about. So the first half of the series is really more about Takuma getting the 2 girls to forgive each other than it is about romance. And eventually it goes on to be about getting the rest of their classmates to drop their grudge against Hayami too, but there's still a little more to the story than that. Starting from the first time she invites Takuma to her home, we start to see signs that something's not quite right with Hinata. We learn pretty early on that she may not be romantically interested in Takuma at all. The 2 of them getting together is what her grandfather wants, because apparently the Hirose family is really well connected politically. To be honest, that aspect of the story always felt a little weak to me. But more so than that, Hinata always looks a little sad, and whenever Takuma pushes her to think for herself and go against her family's wishes, she kind of freaks out and starts talking about Hinata in the 3rd person. At last, she tells him that she used to have a younger sister named Hotaru, who drowned when they were kids. And why yes, her sister does look like Otoha. But even this isn't quite as straightforward as the conclusions you're probably jumping to. It was almost the truth. The Kagura family did used to have 2 daughters, Hinata and Hotaru, but it was Hinata who drowned, after which their grandfather was left in a bit of a panic over having Hotaru as an heir. I'm not sure what was so much better about Hinata, just that she seemed more outgoing and obedient, I guess. At any rate, through a mixture of brainwashing and flat-out abuse, her grandfather convinces Hotaru to pretend to be her sister to make the family proud, telling her it's what the real Hinata would have wanted. When Hinata died, she took on the persona of Otoha, the hero in a story Hotaru was writing. She stuck around waiting for the right person to show up who could help Hotaru be confident enough to stand up to their grandfather and be herself again. And I have to say, it was pretty damn satisfying to see Hotaru walk into class and announce to the room who she really was. But now that her last wish has been fulfilled, Otoha is ready to move on. And she takes something else with her. Let's back up for a minute. Takuma is blind. He lost his sight as a child after an accident that killed his mother. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Except the doctors can't find anything physically wrong with him, so the whole reason he goes to live with his uncle in the first place is in the hopes that being away from the chaos of the city might magically cure his eyesight. And it does! Otoha grants him the ability to see again at the end of episode 1, and if you're anything like me, this is a little irritating for a few reasons. For one, having a blind protagonist was the main draw of the series for me. It's not that boy moves to small town full of complicated family secrets is a bad premise for a story on its own, but there's nothing to make it really stand out from all the other relatively interesting anime ideas out there. I was looking forward to a unique perspective on the story, and there are some times when this is done well. We get some insight into how Takuma navigates the world without something that most of us take for granted. He has an alarm clock that speaks to him to tell him the time. When Hotaru is showing him around on his first day, he recognizes the different classrooms by smell because he hasn't gotten used to the layout of the school yet. I can't say it's handled well all the time. Takuma does come across as a little too helpless at times, and there's a groan-worthy, predictable gag where he ends up groping the girls because he can't see what he's reaching for. But all in all, those scenes were fairly balanced out with good ones. I'm particularly fond of the scene in episode 1 where the screen goes black, except for the subtitles, and Takuma starts talking about how he sees the world. If they'd only stuck with this, it could have been something really special. To add insult to injury, Takuma really doesn't have any personality apart from being the nice new kid. His blindness was the only interesting thing about him, which is just bad character writing in general. But what struck me around episode 9 or 10 is that he really didn't accomplish anything he couldn't have done while blind. And he may not have. When Otoha fades away, his eyesight starts to fade again too, and he doesn't take it well. To be honest, the times when he was lashing out at everybody were the only times he felt like a full-fledged character, rather than just a bland conduit to tell the girls' stories. Finally, his uncle calls a doctor out to look at him. The doctor tells them that nothing has changed since day 1, which does clear up a few early critiques. One of the most irritating things to me early on was that not a single character mentioned his magically cured eyesight. Not to question it or even just be amazed by it. Makes a little more sense now that a doctor's telling us it was all in his head. Takuma never actually got his sight back, he just convinced himself he did, and his friends are shocked to learn he thought he could see for the past 9 episodes. It really sheds an interesting light on the story. If only they'd stopped there. Episode 12 is a mess. He basically regresses to the mental age he was when his mother died, mistakes Hayami for his mother, goes back to the city with Hayami, who has this oddly omniscient moment where she leads him into remembering exactly how his mother died, then dies in the exact same way, raising the question in my mind of whether Hayami ever really existed at all. And then Takuma gets his sight back, everyone moves on with their lives, and Otoha appears again to bring Hayami back to life. And I'm done with this story. Regardless of whether you want to believe that any of it actually happened, I cannot forgive this ending. I like a happy ending as much as anyone, but it really destroys the impact a story has when there are no lasting consequences. It would almost make it better if this was all some game Takuma's subconscious was playing on him, and you know it's bad when you'd prefer that the main character is crazy. I'm almost at a loss when it comes to recommendations. On the one hand, H2O isn't terrible. It kind of derails at the end, but the middle isn't bad. I can't say I ever felt really connected to Takuma or Hayami, but a lot of the minor characters, even the ones who should have been annoying, were actually really likable. And I really liked watching Hotaru go from being someone who couldn't even stand up for herself to someone who called the police on her own grandfather to protect her friends. Objectively speaking, I do have to admit that one of H2O's biggest flaws is just that it wasn't the story I wanted it to be, the story I thought it was going to be. If the rest of it sounds interesting, you probably will enjoy this anime. But if you were looking for a show that portrayed a main character with a disability in a positive, empowering way, well, I suggest you keep looking. Thank you for watching.